When I was still just a teenager, my family and I moved from our home in England to the Irish countryside. We lived on the outskirts of a very small town, surrounded by nothing else but farms, country roads, along with several rivers and tributaries. I was far from happy to be living here, as not only did I miss the good life I had back home, but in the Irish Midlands, there was basically nothing to do. A common stereotype with Ireland is that it always rains. And let me tell you, as someone who has lived here for 6 years, the stereotype is well deserved. After a handful of months living here, it was now early November, and with it came very heavy and non-stop rain. In fact, the rain was so heavy this month, the surrounding rivers had flooded into the town and adjoining country roads. On the day this happened, I had just come out from school and began walking home, approaching the road which leads out of town and towards my house. I then see a large group of people having gathered around. Squeezing my way through the crowd of townfolk, annoyingly blocking my path, I'm then surprised to see the road to my house is completely flooded by water. After asking around, I then learn the crowd of people are also wanting to get to their homes, but because of the flood, they and I have to wait for a tractor to come along and ferry everyone across, a pair at a time. Being the grouchy teenager I was then, I was in no mood to wait around for a tractor ride when all I wanted to do was to get home and binge TV. And so, turning around, I head back into the town square to try and find my own way back home. Walking all the way to the other end of town, I then cut down a country road which I knew would eventually lead to my house. And thankfully, this road had not yet been flooded. Continuing for around 5 minutes down this road, I then came upon a small stone arch bridge. But unfortunately for me, the bridge had been closed off by traffic cones, where standing in front of them was a soaking wet policeman, or what the Irish call Garda. Ready to accept defeat and head all the way back into town, a bit of Irish luck thankfully came to my aid. A jeep had only just pulled up to the crossroads, driven by a man in a farmer's cap with a border collie sat in the passenger seat. Leaving his post by the bridge, the policeman then approaches the farmer's jeep, seeming to know him and his dog. It was a small town after all. With the policeman now distracted, I saw an opportunity to cross the bridge, and being the rebellious little shite I was, I did just that. Comedically tiptoeing my way towards the bridge, all the while keeping an eye out for the policeman, still chatting with the farmer through the jeep window. I then cross over the bridge and hurtle down the other side. However, when I get there, I then see why the bridge was closed off in the first place. On this side of the bridge, the stretch of country road in front of it was entirely flooded with brown, murky water. In fact, the road was that flooded I almost mistook it for a river. Knowing I was only a 20-minute walk from reaching my house, I rather foolishly decided to take the chance and enter the flooded road, continuing on my quest. After walking for only a couple of minutes, I was already waist-deep in the freezing cold water, and considering the smell, I must have been trudging through more than just mud. The further I continued along the flooded road, my body began shivering as I did. The water around me only continued to rise, where I then resort to carrying my school bag overhead. Still wading my way through the very deep flood, I feel no closer to the road outside my house, leading me to worry I have accidentally taken the wrong route home. Exhausted, shivering, and a little bit afraid for my safety, I now thankfully recognize a tall, distant tree that I regularly pass on my way to school. Feeling somewhat hopeful, I continue onwards through the flood, and although the fear of drowning was still very much real, I now began to have a brand new fear. But unlike before, this fear was rather unbeknown. Whether out of some primal instinct or not, I twirl carefully around in the water to face the way I came from before, where I see the long bending river of the flooded road. But in the distance, protruding from the brown rippling surface, maybe 20 or 30 meters away, I catch sight of something else. Or should I say, someone else. What I see is a man, either in his late 30s or early 40s, standing in the middle of the flooded road. His hair was damp blonde or brown, and he appeared to be wearing a black trench coat or something similar. But the disturbing thing about this stranger's appearance was that while his right sleeve was submerged beneath the water, the left sleeve was completely armless. What I mean is, the man's left sleeve, not submerged like its opposite, was tied up high into a knot beneath his shoulder. If it wasn't startling enough to see a strange one-armed man appear in the middle of a flooded road, I then noticed something about him that was far more alarming. You see, when I first lay eyes upon this stranger, I mistook him as being rather heavy. But upon further inspection, I then realized the one-armed man was not heavy at all. If anything, he looked just like a dead body that had been pulled from a river. What I mean is, the man looked unnaturally bloated. As one can imagine, I was more than a little terrified. Unaware who this strange, grotesque man even was, I wasn't going to hang around to find out. Quickly shifting around, I try and move as fast as I can through the water's current, hoping to God this bloated phantom would not follow behind. Although I never once looked back to see if he was still there, thankfully, by the time the daylight was slowly beginning to fade, I had reached not only the end of the flood, but also the safety of the road directly beside my house. Already worried half to death by my late arrival, I never bothered to tell my parents about the one-armed stranger I encountered. After all, considering the man's unnatural appearance, I wasn't even myself sure if what I saw was a real flesh and blood man, or if it was something else entirely. I don't claim to be much of a writer, but sharing this story of mine has been a long time coming. I used to be a lorry driver for a living, or if you're American, I used to be a trucker. For 14 years I drove along the many motorways and through busy cities of England. Well, more than a decade into the job, I finally had enough. Not of being a lorry driver per se, but being a lorry driver in England. The endless traffic and mind-crippling hours away from my wife just wasn't worth it anymore. Talking to the missus about this, she couldn't help but feel the same way. So she suggested we finally look to moving abroad. Although living on a school teacher's and lorry driver's salary didn't leave us with many options, my wife then suggested we move to the neighbouring Republic of Ireland. Having never been to the Emerald Isle myself, my wife reassured me that I'd love it there. After all, there's less cities, less people, and even less traffic. That's all well and good, love, but what do I do for work? I question her, more than skeptical to the idea. Lorry driver, love, she responds, with quick condescension. Well, a year or so later, this idea of moving across the pond eventually became a reality. We had settled down in the southwest of Ireland in County Kerry, apparently considered by most to be the most beautiful part of the country. Having changed countries but not professions, my wife taught children in the village, whereas I went back on the road, driving from Court in the south, up along the west coast and stopping just short of the Northern Irish border. As much as I hated being a lorry driver in England, the same could not be said here. The traffic along the country roads was almost inexistent, and having only small towns as my drop-off points, I was on the road for no more than a day or two at a time, which was handy, considering the missus and I were trying to start a family of our own. In all honesty, driving up and down the roads of the rugged west coast was more of a luxury than anything else. On one side of the road I had the endless green hills and mountains of the countryside, and on the other, the breathtaking Atlantic coastway. If I had to say anything bad about the job, it would have to be driving the western country roads at night. It's hard enough as a lorry driver having to navigate these dark, narrow roads, which bend one way then the other, but driving along them at night. Something about it is very unsettling. If I had to put my finger on it, I'd say it has to do with something one of my colleagues said to me before my first haul. I won't give away his name, but I'll just call him Padraig. A seasoned lorry driver like myself, Padraig welcomed me to the company by giving me a stern but whimsical warning about driving the western counties at night. Be sure to keep your wits about you, Jamie boy. Things here aren't what they always seem to be. Keep your eyes on the road at all times, I tell you, and you'll be grand. A few months into the job, and things couldn't have been going better. Having just come from a 2-day haul, my wife surprises me with news that she was now pregnant with our first child. After a few days off to celebrate this news with my wife, I was now back on the road, happier than I had ever been before. Driving for 4 hours on this particular day, I was now somewhere in County Mayo, the northwest of the country. Although I pretty much loved driving through every county on the western coast, County Mayo was a little too barren for my liking. Now driving at night, I was moving along a narrow country road in the middle of nowhere, where outlining this road to each side was a long stretch of stone wall, and considering the smell of manure now inside the cab with me, I presumed on the other side of these walls was either cow or sheep field. Keeping in mind Padraig's words of warning, I made sure to keep my wits about me, staring constantly at the stretch of road in front of me, guessing which way it would curve next in the headlights. I was now becoming surprisingly drowsy. With nothing else on my mind but the unborn child now growing inside my wife's womb, my eyes never once left the road in front of me. My mind did somewhat wander elsewhere. This would turn out to be the biggest mistake of my life, because cruising down the road through the fog and heavy rain, my wary eyes became alert to a distant shape now apparent up ahead. Though hard to see through the fog and rain, the shape appears to belong to that of a person, walking rather sluggishly from one side of the road to the other. Hunched over like some old crone, this unknown person appears to be carrying a heavy object against their abdomen with some difficulty. By the time I process all of this information, having already pulled the brakes, the lorry continues to screech along the wet cement. The person on the road does not move or duck out of the way, until, feeling a vibrating thud inside the cab, the unknown person crashes into the front of the vehicle unit. Or more precisely, the unit crashes into them. Bloody hell! I cry out reactively, the lorry having now screeched to a halt. Frozen in shock by the sudden realization I've just run over someone, I fail to get out of the vehicle. That should have been my first reaction, but quite honestly, I was afraid of how I would find them. Once I gain any kind of courage, I hesitantly lean over the counter to see even the slightest sliver of the individual. And to my absolute horror, I see the individual on the road is a woman. Oh no, 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 no! But the reason I knew instantly this was a woman was because whomever they were heavily pregnant. Jesus Christ, what have I done? I screamed from inside the cab. Quickly climbing down onto the road, I move instantly to the front of the headlights, praying internally this woman and her unborn child was still alive. But once I catch sight of the woman, exposed by the bright headlights shining off the road, I'm caught rather off guard. Because for some reason this woman, she wasn't wearing any clothes. Unable to identify the woman by her face, as her swollen belly covers up half of her body, I move forward, again with hesitance towards her, averting my eyes until her face was now in sight. Thankfully, in the corner of my eye, I could see the limbs of the woman moving, which meant she was still alive. Now, what I'm about to say next is the whole unbelievable part of it. But I swear this is what I saw. When I come upon the woman's face, what I see isn't a woman at all. The head was not the head of a human being. It was the head of a ewe. A sheep. What the? I believe my exact words were, just as my reaction was when I hit this thing. I'm completely frozen with terror, having lost any feeling in my arms and legs, and although this creature, as best as I could call it, was moving ever so slightly, it was now stiff as a piece of roadkill. Unlike its eyes, which were black and motionless, its mouth was wide in a permanent silent scream. I was afraid to stare at the rest of it, but my curiosity got the better of me. Its ewe's head, which ends at the loose pale skin of its neck, was followed by the very human body, at least for the most part. Its skin was covered in a barely visible layer of white fur, or wool. Its breasts, not like that of a human woman, were grotesquely similar to the teats of a ewe, a pale sort of veiny pink. But what's more, on the swollenness of its belly, I see what must have been a pagan symbol of some kind, carved into the skin, presumably with a knife. The symbol was of 3 circular spirals, each connected into the middle. As I'm studying the spirals, wondering what the hell they mean and who in God's name carved it there, the spirals begin to move. It was the stomach. Whatever was inside, it was still alive. The way the thing was moving, almost trying to burst its way out. That was the final straw. Before anything more can happen, I leave the dead creature and the unborn thing inside it. I return to the cab, put the gear stick in reverse, and then I drive the hell out of there. Remembering I'm still on the clock, I continue driving up to Donegal, before finishing my last drop-off and turning home. Though I was in no state to continue driving that night, I just wanted to get home as soon as possible. But there was no way I was driving back down through County Mayo, and so I return home driving much further inland than usual. I never told my wife what happened that night. God, I can only imagine how she would have reacted, and in her condition nonetheless. I just went on as normal until the next haul started, more afraid than ever to drive on those roads again. But with a job to do and a baby on the way, I didn't have much of a choice. Although I did make several more trips on the northwestern roads, I made sure never to be there under the cover of night. Thankfully, whatever it was I saw, I never saw again.